Hello, and welcome back for our second panel discussion. Regrettably, we're still having technical difficulties in getting Dr. Deong Wu to join us, but we're going to go ahead now and discuss the presentations that were given. I do want to remind you that we will post online, and we'll give you the link to Dr. Wu's presentation as a pre-record. So, Aideen, would you like to lead us off?
Sure. I think one of the first big questions is, what are the key challenges in testing hypotheses for dietary bioactives like the flavanols from observational type studies? Raul, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the first limitations is the databases that we have. Still, we have some foods that are not available in the databases. There is also the problem with the variety of foods and variety of the composition in these polyphenols. For example, TEC can vary a lot between varieties and types depending on where it's on places. And probably one of the potential solutions is that what the panel before has discussed about is the biomarkers, the use of biomarkers in combination of dietary questionnaires. But we also don't have a real or good biomarkers for example, for T flavanols yet. So this is a major issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, but I have to offer my apologies. We have with us on the panel discussion, Dr. Joy DeBow. She's the head of scientific affairs and nutrition at Actera, the largest global tea company. She also develops and leads the scientific research agenda focused on the benefits of tea and herbals and specific health outcomes. Prior to her joining Actera, Dr. DeBow was the head of nutrition and health for North America at Unilever. I'm sorry for skipping that introduction, Joy. But so that was a really good point about the lack of really solid databases. But I would ask you, Mario, if I would say that the database on bioactives in broccoli probably has as much variability as that we might find in tea, or do you think it's really different because of some people drink a weak brew, others a strong brew? How much variability do we really see out there?
I think it's a good point, and I think you can do a standard database entry for tea that you see, whether it's in the USDA database or what you see on Phenol Explorer, but it may not replicate what broad individuals are consuming because of the nature of individualization, but also the nature of what we talked about with products that people are calling tea, which are tea, but they vary significantly in terms of content. So I think in some ways we need to embrace that variability rather than try to fight it, understand how we can create markers for intake, maybe that are either highly specific, or we could begin to look at broader, even untargeted approaches that help us group people that are drinkers and consumers and non-consumers, which I think is kind of where the field is starting to move. But I used to fight variability, as an analytical chemist, and now I think I embrace it because it helps us kind of create a natural dose effect out there. But I think, Raul's right. I think the key thing is we have to make sure we begin to develop a path where we can capture that variation more accurately and make sure it's natural, and out there. But yeah, the databases are all over the place on anything. I mean, there's so much variation in all those aspects.
I'll just build on that point. I know USDA was also looking to update their database on flavonoids, particularly for tea, because of that variability. And also the fact that a lot of times the data is based on what's reported in the literature and not necessarily what's actually tested in the lab, which we know, who knows where the reported literature is getting these values from, right? So we've made, and I say we, Lipton has made a concerted effort to declare flavonoids on our teas. We do all our in-house testing on our teas, and then also communicate to the consumer how to best brew that tea to get that optimal dose of flavonoids, which is usually 2 minutes in boiling water. So all in all, there is variability out there, but I think we are slightly making progress towards trying to get our hands on that. And of course, there's natural variability depending on how the tea is processed, grown, and so on and so forth.
That's great to hear, because I think if we're going to improve consumer understanding about tea and its bioactives, having that transparency, having the ability to choose products that list that, I think it also will encourage other companies to do the same. One thing we brought up in the last discussion, but in a different way, is what you feel are some of the next big questions about tea and health that need to be addressed. Do we drill down where we have pretty strong suggestive evidence and try to build that closer to definitive? Or should we really try to find those areas where the quality of the studies or the data are weaker and we need to build that up?
If you want, I can start. I think that, in my opinion, there is a lot of evidence, for example, for cardiovascular diseases, and we can do a lot with this evidence, and we can start developing these dietary guidelines and this type of recommendation based on this evidence. But it's true that we need much more information, for example, in the case of cancer, because there are many types of cancer and we only have information for some of them. But also there is also this, there is a lot of things going on, for example, with cognitive or neurodegenerative diseases, that it's a really important aspect also for the community.
Thank you. Aideen?
Yeah.
Or Mario? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think to a large extent, I agree with Raul, because I say, we have one area that seems to be mature enough to move forward on the cardiovascular side. So you have to stop and think, how do consumers think? I don't go grocery shopping and I'm going to buy this for cancer and this for heart and this for brain and this for my knee that hurts and everything else. The one recommendation on cardiovascular is going to provide benefits across the board. If you look at many of these studies, I think even from Raul's presentation, from what we heard on the cognitive side, those dose ranges are overlapping. So I think we have a strong case. We need to make it, and I think you'll see it benefit across all of those spaces. So I feel we're ready, and the next step is moving forward.
I want to can I weigh in on that? I think it's a crucial point, because obviously coming from a brand or industry perspective, it's the translation of the science into the marketplace that ultimately makes the public health impact, right? So the preponderance of evidence is on CVD, and that's where we have definitely focused our efforts on, either in providing funding for that or continuing to drive the message. Where I think there's the disconnect is, what are flavonoids? People don't understand flavonoids, right? And so you start talking tea and flavonoids, and they just don't even, we've run consumer panels, they don't understand it. They still equate it to antioxidants, which we know antioxidants don't, flavonoids don't behave as antioxidants, and there's just a big misperception out there. So for us, we're really trying to drive educational awareness, and I call on the industry to do that alongside us, to really educate on the benefits of flavonoids. And then with tea being one of the best sources out there, I think it's a natural in then to start talking about flavonoids, the benefits, particularly on heart health. But to Mario's point, then it extends into other health outcomes.
I think I agree completely, Joy, about the dissemination, but I think it's not just industry. We as scientists need to get better at disseminating the complexity of our message, via the media. The other
join you on that effort. That'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, the other important thing is inter-individual variability. So for example, to get the benefit on heart health, do I need 2 cups a day or 5 for that benefit? And it's actually having more of that, which really goes back to the previous panel where we talked about stratified nutrition. And I think that's the next stage for science, be it through microbiome research, metabolomic research. We need to kind of work out, if you have a high background diet, you may need far less. If you have a way of metabolizing the flavonoids differently, you may need more or less tea. But what is very clear from the epidemiological data is You know, it's really very simple additions of tea to the diet. It's only, you know, a few cups a day that seem to make a difference, particularly for heart and now brain health.
So, I mean, that sounds good, but Mario, is a couple cups of tea a day adequate even to set an adequate intake? I mean, the idea of variability is one thing and translation, but when we come to DRIs or even dietary guidance, those agencies really want more quantitative data.
So I think this is a good point, and I think it's the difference between setting something on a public policy, public health perspective versus what you're seeing now at NIH in personalization and personalized nutrition. And Dean brought up the whole point of perhaps you have metabotypes within tea consumers, and we already know of that from the energy metabolism standpoint. Not necessarily metabotypes, but you have folks with SNPs and COMT that respond and don't respond, right? So from the standpoint of fatty acid oxidation. So if you look at the standpoint of the public health, so the big picture, then I think 1 to 2 cups within the context of the variation that we can see out there from brewed tea is enough. Why the DRI process is important is because it can help us put a number around what that range should be, that if Joy goes out and is formulating ready to drink teas, we now can see that they begin to fall into that range. So people can think about it in terms of servings, knowing that we can adequately talk about it the way we talk about calcium, the way we talk about vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin whatever. You know, it's in the sense that it provides a bit of consistency, knowing that products out there fall into that category. It can be a little nebulous, you know, 100% fruit juice versus something that is 98% fruit juice. The 98% doesn't fall into dietary guidance. Consumers may not know the difference, right? But I think it's a start, and it helps us raise the bar in terms of the quality of the products out there, and it helps differentiate responsible consumption versus refreshment, which is a little different.
So I'd just like to ask one other question here when we talk about the next big questions and so on. And I understand the value for public health and for consumer education about these hard endpoints of cardiometabolic disease. And I don't think consumers particularly care about mechanisms of action. Even when we talk about antioxidants, they can't even define that. But as Raul pointed out in his talk, a major factor here seems to be the gut microbiome. And is more understanding of that is talking about effects on digestive health and the gut microbiome, a message that can be translated, or a message, in fact, that can be used to help set dietary guidance?
It's a really difficult point. I think that it's true that microbiota plays a really relevant role, but even for researchers, it's difficult to identify exactly the role. We are starting knowing which are the potential effects or the potential interplay between the different actors. For microbiome or microbiota, I think it's too early to say something or to translate something to the public health messages or even for the customers. So I think it's too early even for us.
And I agree. It's a knowledge gap to fill. Aideen?
I think that's absolutely right. I think we're at the very early stages of trying to understand it. But what's very important for flavonoids compared to other things in the diet is a lot of them reach the gut before they're metabolized. So relative nutrients, macronutrients, the bugs in the gut are probably more important than we think. So it's definitely an area that we need to progress. But it's a mammoth task to try and understand. But then you can actually start to see, sort of pre-probiotic approaches to enhancing metabolism if we see that it's important for, for health, be it cognitive or heart health or other endpoints. So there is there's a lot of potential there.
Just thinking that we have two different distinct things to consider with tea and flavonoids in general is there is an acute effect that is driven independent of the microbiota metabolizing these compounds. So if you provide epicatechin from cocoa or from tea, or epigallocatechin gallate, you're going to see an immediate response that maps to the pharmacokinetics of those flavonoids in terms of FMD and blood pressure. And that's important. But the longer term effects, and really what's probably truly modifying the risk, is related exactly to the metabolites that are formed through that interaction. And there's nothing that strikes me as direct proof other than if you take a highly oxidized black tea, it's hard to distinguish the benefit from what you get from even a green tea, right? So you look at it and say, well, we have compounds that we can't see in the body. We know cannot be absorbed, yet benefits are being seen. And so that interplay with the microbiota is one that we have to begin to unravel. I just worry that as scientists, we keep trying to hit a home run and try to find the magic pair of metabolite with bacteria, and we're not holistic enough at looking at broader patterns and response with the more modern analytical approaches that are out there now. Rather than trying to be so quantitative, we might go back to what I was saying about food. We might want to be more holistic and untargeted in terms of trying to understand what it is we're seeing. The variation may be a really, really important thing for us to unravel that.
So one of the issues, I mean, this has been a great discussion, and if I'm asking impossible questions, that's okay. But I guess my question is, what is the best way to move forward in developing and promulgating food-based dietary guidance for beverages? Mario, you talked about the need for DRIs and then that affecting dietary guidance. Joy, you talked about a role that industry might be able to play. Is there, to get the political will necessary to get official agencies involved, is there a way for third parties, like professional societies? I can think of some like the American Heart Association or the American Society for Nutrition or IFINS to get not just scientists, not just industry, but everybody who's working in this field and cares about nutrition and public health to create a little bit of a movement or forward motion that we can actually begin to make these next steps, Mario, that you've talked about.
So I can weigh in on this because I've been pretty active in this space with dietary guidelines, just even moving the needle slightly and getting tea recognized as a beverage of choice for consumers. So it's a start, but it's nowhere near what Mario's referenced earlier in his presentation. So of course, with the dietary guidelines process already kicking off again, I would call on others to submit comments and really drive the message home to USDA and HHS. They did recognize other dietary components, whatever that language they had used selectively, but to really drive home the message of flavonoids. But outside of the scope of dietary guidelines, because I do think they'll continue to look at food groups and essential nutrients, and that just tea and coffee get left out of the mix. Right. I am anxious to see what comes of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommendations that will soon to be coming out that Dr. Wallace referenced in the next 2 to 3 months. As I understand it, they'll be released and open for public comment. So I think we're all anxiously looking to see what those recommendations would be. I'm hopeful there'll be good, clear guidance, not just for clinicians like dietitians and those as healthcare professionals, but also to be able to translate that again to more meaningful consumer impact. So I think, we'll see what comes out of that, and using the forces of, if you will, of registered dietitians to communicate that out, getting the word out in the media, and really drawing recognition. My hope is that maybe that will light a fire. Maybe I'm optimistic, glass half full of tea, so to speak, that this will drive NASEM to do something. But I think, unfortunately, flavonoids are going to be left out of the mix when it comes to a DRI. I think they'll look at lutein and other, even essential nutrients and updating them before they get to flavonoids. But I think there's other means, to the point of your question, that we can use the recommendations, hopefully, to drive our actions forward with consumption of flavonoids in the diet.
I'd like to agree, and I hope that's the case, but let me turn that, because your reference, and mine too, is thinking about the National Academy of Medicine, the Food and Nutrition Board, the HHS, USDA dietary guidelines for Americans. But if I can ask Raul and Aideen, what about the EU? Whether EFSA or the development of the daily reference values in Europe, is there the same kind of obstacles to move forward, or is there something that people on the other side of the pond from me might be able to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Raul knows a little more about EFSA, but they're very much more focused on the claims and functionality end than they are to the dietary reference values that we have, which tend to be country specific as opposed to EU wide. And they haven't been reviewed since the 1990s. So they're, which was very much focused on deficiency diseases rather than optimal nutrition. But in terms of organizations like the European Society of Cardiology, I know there is a sort of a headwind towards prevention within that. So potentially then nutrition becomes a bigger part. And thinking of having a guideline developed via the ESC, maybe some way to start, and then look at whether that could be joined up with the AHA, if you think in terms of heart health benefits.
Yes, I don't have many things more to add. For example, in Spain, also the dietary references are for essential nutrients, but not for bioactive compounds or something like that. So for the moment, I think that it's almost everywhere similar. So it's difficult also to have a dietary recommend, especially a DRI or something like that is not essential, because it's not essential nutrient, because at the end the definition is more for essential nutrients. So probably
given that all of the evidence is the same, there really should be sort of more of a joint up thinking about this. So rather than having US guidelines and then, UK or China or somewhere else. And it's how do we do that? How do we get people to join up? We're looking at the same data. We're synthesizing the same data.
That's the scary part. It's like we're all doing the work twice, if not 3 times. I get it that there are population specific patterns that we need to consider, especially in terms of adoption and translation. But you make a great point, Aideen. There has to be some ability to at least adopt or translate quickly to useful guidance. To me, I think the path, I don't know if we ever need to get to a full DRI or an AI for flavan-3-ols, but we need to go through the exercise. That means we may not have to go through the official channels. But what we're already doing is providing ranges that fit comfortably within normal dietary use of this. We're not recommending 15 cups of tea a day. It's very different than what you get if someone were to come down the path on resveratrol, right? I mean, it's completely a different animal. And I think what we need to do is make sure that good information continues to get out there. Comments are made. The Dietary Guidelines Committee is crack the door open a bit, if you will. I think this next cycle, I can't remember if it's going to be in the hands of HHS, I think.
It's HHS.
Yeah. So maybe they'll look at those a little differently too. But with that door cracked, we have an opportunity to continue to move the needle. This is not a 2-year process. It's probably a 10-year process. But in that process, we're also educating consumers. And I think ultimately when consumers adopt, guidance will follow. I hate to say it that way, but it's true, right? I mean, you will immediately regulate something that people are doing. And that's the way we work in this society, I guess. But I think we need to focus on the dietary guidelines more than DRI process we can do, but not officially.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the things, though, that's changing, and whether we talk about DRIs or even dietary guidance, is the changing of the concept that preventing deficiency diseases through nutrition is not the only concept that we have. And in this new era of food is medicine, we can start talking about health promotion and disease prevention as the criteria, not preventing a deficiency disease, but truly in a public health way, promoting health through these guidance and recommendations. And it's just, again, I do not want to suggest that dietary and nutrient inadequacies and frank deficiencies aren't a real problem in some areas of the world. But more broadly, I think this idea that we've got to move forward to this concept about this idea of food as medicine and talking about health promotion and disease prevention, not preventing deficiencies, to move forward.
Yeah, I do want to point one more thing out too, which is how are consumers getting their information today versus 5 years ago and 10 years ago, and how will they get it in 5 or 10 from now? So the way we communicate about products is back to Joy's point of how we educate folks. These new apps on your phone can guide you to products, and we need to be working with folks that are developing that type of technology more as we know more. Because that's going to change the face of what we see at the grocery store, but more importantly, what's in the cart, as people are guided more by technology and utilize technology more. And again, this is a first world problem, right? This is our problem in the United States, but as you move to preventing chronic disease, we're relying more and more on smartwatches and smartphones and everything else. And so that will change behavior. And tea should be easy. We consume a lot of it already.
Good point. I'm not seeing any other additional points in the chat. Someone's vision may be better than mine. I do want to give, as we wrap up this session and before we go to a closing comments from Aidan and myself, I would like to give each of you a chance to have your own closing statement. You've wonderfully attended this whole symposium. Any closing thoughts about what's where we are in terms of our confidence about tea and health and what the next steps should be?
I can start. I mean, it was a great symposium. Appreciate the Tea Association for hosting this. Well needed, and I look forward to any future discussions around it. I think my takeaway message is basically tea can cover many different areas of the body, and looking at it more holistically, right? Instead of more fragmented like cardiovascular and brain and gut. We're now knowing as scientists that this all interrelates and there's an interplay that goes on, right? It's not just in isolation or siloed within the body. One area affects the other. So I think that research today for me that was presented really brought that home on how tea can address multiple health outcomes that are really, we're at a precedent time in this country and globally with the chronic disease. So I think tea can be an easy solution and tool for consumers to really help retard and if not prevent chronic disease.
Yeah, thank you very much. Raul?
For me, the take message should be something like tea can prevent several diseases at the same time. So this is a really important message, and probably for the advances in the future, probably the two main points. One for it's how can we communicate these advances to the society, and for researchers, I think that one really important or hot topic right now is the interrelation or the relationship between tea consumption and gut microbiota and the health effects. This is really a really hot topic right now for researchers. I think that we need to do our best for trying to disentangle this issue.
Great, thank you. And Mario?
So I guess my take-home message is listening to an interesting day with just every year more and more data suggesting the benefits of tea consumption. My take-home message: let's not overly complicate this, right? I mean, I think about it in another way. In an earlier life, I was taught that the number one public health importance of tea consumption was the fact that people boiled water, and you stop the spread of disease by consuming tea and not water. But then how far have we come to realize where we do have far more to gain from consumption than just keeping us from getting sick from waterborne illness because of these things. But let's not overly complicate it in that sense. I think the data are growing, they're there. Have we crossed the threshold? Let's go ahead and start implementing messages that make sense. And that's really where I feel that it, you know, sometimes you feel like you know enough to make a very good educated decision. That's where I kind of stand on this one.
Great. That's a very interesting perspective. Thank you, Mario.